All right, we're going to get started here. Thanks for everyone's patience. So, today we're talking about the critical components of an organization's identity access management program. I'm going to go through 11 components. As I go through each component, feel free to ask me any questions afterwards. I'll open up the floor for anyone to chime in, and I'd love a lively discussion regarding the different components that can make an IAM program successful. Some might disagree. I know we have some, really well-rounded and experienced IAM professionals here. So, I imagine that there could be some differing opinions at times. Just a little background. According to OWASP in 2021, broken access control was the most serious web application security risk. The contributed data from their test indicate that on average, 3.81% of applications tested had one or more common weakness enumerations, or CWEs, with more than 318,000 occurrences of CWEs in this risk category. The 34 CWEs mapped to broken access control had more occurrences in applications than any other category. Notable common weakness enumerations were CWE 200, exposure of sensitive information to an unauthorized actor, CWE 201, insertion of sensitive information into sent data, and CWE 352, cross-site request forgery. Businesses are the target for a variety of different cyber attacks, such as ransomware, advanced persistent threats, and insider threats. It's a serious problem. More than 10.9 billion records with sensitive information have been breached according to public disclosures between January 2005 and July 2018, according to privacyrights.org. So, the 11 components of an IAM program that I'm proposing here are to mitigate those risks and lessen the chance of breaches and other bad events occurring. So these 11 components we're going to go through are centralized identity management, 1, 2, standards-based authentication, 3, federated identity, 4, identity governance and administration, 5, privileged access management, 6, proper access control, 7, threat modeling, 8, integration with security operations, 9, MFA, 10, DevSecOps, 11, policies and procedures. So starting with the first component, centralized identity management. Centralized identity management means IAM all happens in one environment. This looks like the user signing into a single workspace to access all the applications and tools they need. Decentralized identity management means IAM is spread out across multiple environments. In this instance, a user would sign into a single workspace, then continue on to sign into each individual application and tool separately. Because each application has its own sign-in, proponents of decentralization argue it brings a greater level of security. However, high-friction sign-ons create security fatigue, and trusting users to keep up to date on best security practices across an organization is unrealistic. Some hope blockchain will be used to simplify this process with an identity trust fabric and identity wallet software. However, this technology is still in its infancy. So, do you all have any feedback on those two? Or is there any disagreement about Benjamin, here we go. See if I can allow you to speak here. Here we go, Ben. Think should be allowing you. There we go. So I've added Benjamin to the stage here.
Yes, thank you. I have a question about, enterprises who are acquiring different companies, pretty rapidly. Let's say, maybe 3 to 5 companies a year on average, right? How does the large enterprise deal with, having a centralized platform for IAM as, they acquire different subsidiaries and each one may have their own. Do you foresee any advice on that or any solutions that are coming to market?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ben. And so with when that occurs, you can't boil the ocean all at one time. I would say starting small, and moving applications to use a centralized identity management system over time is the way to go, because teams, from my experience, they have already a lot of competing priorities from their management, and they're developing applications for the business, and IAM sometimes can be on the back burner. So I would say starting small to moving to a centralized identity management system, and also the third component we're going to talk about, federated identity. This is a great fit for that, because as we'll see, what happens in federated identity, and I know you have some familiarity based on your background, is um, single sign-on is a subset, but there's also virtual directory servers, and what those can do is they can allow companies that are joining to integrate their existing databases and other information systems to connect to a centralized directory server. So all the identity information is centralized, and it really helps in the case of a merger or acquisition. Is that helpful, Ben? Ben, I think I might have lost your audio for a moment. Can you hear me? Okay. I'll move to listening. Maybe that'll. Here we go. I think we lost Ben for a moment here, but that was a great question. Um, so for standards-based authentication, this is the second component. Identity providers should follow standards such as OpenID Connect. It adds a authentication layer on top of the OAuth 2 authorization framework. Oh, I see Ben put a heart. I'm glad you can hear me. Secure assertion markup language is another standard. It's a set of profiles for exchanging authentication and authorization data across security domains. And the SAML domain model, an identity provider, is a special type of authentication authority. So following standards provides a number of benefits in general. You have a lot of very smart people working on these. It's visible to the public. They can ensure that everyone who follows this standard is always being as secure as possible. So that's why I recommend using standards-based authentication. The third component that we were just touching on uh, with Benjamin here is federated identity. So, federated identity refers to linking a person's identity and attributes stored across multiple distinct identity management systems. Single sign on, or SSO, is a subset of federated identity. This is a function that allows users to access multiple web applications at once using just one set of credentials. Another technology, virtual directory server, which we were talking about, can be used for federating identity management functionality across diverse organizations and service providers. Today, many businesses leverage a combination of traditional enterprise applications hosted in corporate data centers and SaaS, or software as a service, applications like Salesforce or Google Workspace, such as G Suite, hosted in the cloud. Identity information for the enterprise is maintain a traditional on-premises enterprise directory service like Microsoft Active Directory, while identity information for the SaaS solutions is maintained in separate directory services. Businesses can use virtual directories to federate identity management information. There's some more benefits, such as simplifying IT and security administration, operations, and auditing by centralizing and unifying identity access management and monitoring across applications and systems. It also strengthens security by decoupling identity consumers from identity data repositories and reducing potential attack services and vectors. VDSs, or virtual directory servers, protect and extend previous investments by supporting a wide variety of vendors and technologies, i.e., next generation applications can access legacy data stores, and legacy applications can access next generation data stores. So I see Ben has his hand up. I'm trying to add him back on here. Regarding the federated identity component we just talked about, does that, if you can hear me, does that answer somewhat the question you're asking about? For some reason, I'm having a hard time hearing my audio here. I don't know what it is on my end. Sorry about that, Ben. Potentially, I'm having an issue hearing you. Um, hmm. I could hear you at first. It's strange. I apologize about that, Ben. Um, we'll get together after if they're to go over some of these questions if the audio doesn't work out. Um, the next module is identity governance and administration. IGA is the branch of identity and access management that deals with making appropriate access decisions. It allows your company to embrace the benefits of hyperconnectivity while ensuring that only the right people have access to the right things at the right times. Software tools with automation to address joiner, mover, lever. You join the organization, you move around, you accumulate some roles, and those can accumulate over time and give you too much privilege. So it's important to address that. And then when you leave the organization, that needs to be automated too, so you don't have access after you leave the organization. Um, so in addition to that, you want to have access certifications, audit reporting, and access requests, as well as password management, all part of your identity governance administration tooling. And I know that access certifications can be not very exciting for people, but they are important. You need to be able to validate access, and I always suggest leaning in to your IGA program um, and really making it work. It's tough at first, but once you get it going, it's really worth it. Um, the next component is privileged access management. Organizations implement privileged access management to protect against the threats posed by credential theft and privilege misuse. PAM refers to a comprehensive cybersecurity strategy to control, monitor, secure, and audit all human and non human privileged identities and activities across an enterprise IT environment. Best practices: place all well known infrastructure accounts in a centrally managed digital vault. Regularly and automate rotate passwords after every use. Completely remove all endpoint users from the local admins group on IT Windows workstations to stop credential theft to limit lateral movement. You should vault all privileged accounts used by third-party applications and eliminate hard-coded credentials for commercial off-the-shelf applications. Should vault all SSH key pairs on Linux and Unix production servers and rotate them on a routine basis. You should secure all public cloud privileged accounts, keys, and API keys. Place all credentials and secrets used by CI/CD tools such as Ansible, Jenkins, and Docker in a secure vault, enabling them to be retrieved on the fly, automatically rotated and managed. And isolate all access to shared IDs and require multi-factor authentication, which we'll talk more about soon. So I see Ben has a question in the chat. I'm just going to pull this up here and address this. Hold on 1 second. So Ben's question is, I want to ask about JOT authentication, which is a JSON Web Token, JWT, and how secure you feel it is when trying to pass along secure tokens business to business. The use case is authentication between third-party applications that are hosted outside of the network. So JOT tokens, they're used quite a lot in the OAuth and OpenID Connect world. So, we're so used to them, we often don't pay much attention to how they're actually used. The general opinion, I'd say, is they're good for being used as ID tokens or access tokens and that they're secure, as the tokens are usually signed or even encrypted. So one thing to remember, though, is it's not a protocol, it's a message format, which Ben knows. He's very experienced. So I would say that this is a good practice. You want to make sure that, of course, that the APIs, have proper, network access controls. But as a general practice, using JOT authentication and signing the tokens and everything, I'd say it's secure. And as long as you're applying all the right security controls in addition to that, this is a fine practice. Some best practices I can think of is just, what you can read inside the token. Potentially everyone can read, right? So privacy should be taken into account. If you put sensitive data about a user in the token or even PI, remember that anyone can decode the token and access the data. So if such information can't be removed from the token, I would say just making sure that you're switching to a phantom token approach or the split token approach, where an opaque token is used outside of your infrastructure, which is, I think, what you were thinking of. And the JOTs are only available to your APIs thanks to integration with an API gateway. So I figured, when you asked the question that you were referring to not sharing any sensitive information within the JOT, of course. So I just want to clarify that for everyone, that when you are sharing these, that you have to think of privacy first. You don't want to have private data that can be leaked, right? So just don't put anything valuable about your API in the token, anything that would help attackers to breach your API. Think of some other ones. So I'd say in addition to that, you always want to validate tokens, even if it's on an internal network. We're talking about business to business here. So you have an authorization server client and the resource server. If it's not connected to the internet, you still want to validate. You don't want to rely on your environment settings to be part of your security scheme. If you do move your services to a public domain, the threat model will change, and you'll have to remember to update your security measures. Experience shows that this is very often overlooked. Moreover, when implementing token validation from the start, you just need to guard from situations where someone manages to break into your network or you might have a malicious actor in your organization. You always want to check the issuer. Um, you should have a wait list and just check the issuer. Be sure that it's been issued by someone you expected to issue it. Um, yeah, so those are some best practices to think of. Um, so I hope that's helpful, Ben. Great. Um, Anybody else have any other questions that they wanted to discuss? All right. So, a little bit more about privileged access management. Was something I ask my clients is, do you ensure that any action performed with a surrogate user account, such as root, administrator, or service account, shall be traceable to the personnel who have been authorized to use such an account? And this sometimes throws them off guard because they're not sure a lot of times. You just want to be sure that you're having proper coverage in your PAM program and that you have proper audit controls um, in place. If someone's performing an action, you need to know who did it and what they did. So the next component is attribute-based access control. Sensitive applications and data need protection that is fine-grained. Attribute-based access control, or ABAC, is a context-aware, externalized, dynamic authorization model. Allows for fine-grained policies. The rules for access are centrally managed. Allows for centralized or distributed deployment models. It removes access control logic from the application, and it should be used for applications, APIs, and databases as applicable. A bit more on access control, where you aren't using ABAC, um, role-based or rule-based access control must be utilized to ensure that all actions taken with respect to an organization's information are identified with the individual who performs the action. That goes back to auditing. You need to know what people are doing within your organization and have proper controls in place. And speaking of controls, logical access control policies in place to prevent separation/segregation of duties. That's critical. Next component is threat modeling. It's a technique you can use to help you identify threats, attacks, vulnerabilities, and countermeasures that could affect your IAM implementation within your organization. So I've broken it down into 4 different areas to look at: the target, which would be sensitive user or resource data, biometric data, credentials, and there might be other things that they're targeting, but those are the top 4 ones. The vulnerabilities be your IAM system architectures, configuration and security policy weaknesses, the deployment environment, and of course, the users themselves. The next area to think about are mitigation strategies. So, those would be your security policies and additional software that you can use to protect yourself. The threat categories that I considered when thinking of threat modeling for IAM include access control threats. We discussed this in the beginning. Broken access control was number 1 on OWASP for 2021. There, of course, are web-based threats, threats based on your device. Then there can be more, generic IAM threats as well that, would be sort of common to really any sort of attack vector. So the next component is integration with security operations. Next generation SIM tools have built in big data technologies that include threat intelligence and risk/behavior awareness, making them threat intelligence systems. Threat analytics with big data technologies can feed this threat intelligence to all security controls. Intelligence driven architecture will involve real time responses based on actionable intelligence. The response can be fine-grained in terms of a recommended set of actions. Threat intelligence should be integrated into the IAM stack for design time, provision time, runtime, and access time IAM control response. Threat intelligence should be integrated with network controls, application controls, and data controls. And the reason I'm talking about threat intelligence and SIM and these other security operations is because it really needs to be integrated with IAM. A threat-centric IAM approach fulfills the full loop integration required in intelligence-driven security systems. Policy automation and dynamic policy generation can mature the solution to respond real time with exception policies based on threats. Excellent. I'm seeing some thumbs up in the chat. Glad that people like that. Um, so the next component is MFA. It's important that we prompt users for MFA 8 to 12 hours. And so this is to ensure high assurance sessions. Um, while this may seem aggressive, the purpose of multi-factor authentication is to validate users are who they say they are when they're logging in. It's important to continuously verify this. While you should enforce MFA on every login, though, in some cases, you may be comfortable with less secure factors for low-risk logins. For example, for low-risk logins, you could require a password and SMS one-time password, but for medium-risk logins, requiring a stronger factor like a push or WebAuthn is preferred. You should enable MFA like push also for partners and other third parties, and you should regularly review where weak factors are used in your policy and see if you can improve upon it. Are there any questions so far? I want to open up for some questions while I still have just a few left. But I understand that we've gone through quite some content. It's great. Yeah. So I'm seeing from Ben that some organizations he's worked at that their policy mandates a even shorter prompt time for MFA, and that makes sense. I mean, there are different. What I imagine happened at his organization is that they probably performed some kind of threat modeling assessment um, to figure out, what their risks were, and they have sensitive data for certain applications, and so they have to adjust the prompting based on that. They want to ensure that users are who they say they are, because it's possible that someone could authenticate, impersonate someone even with MFA. It's not easy, but it can be done. And when you have access to sensitive data at an organization, there are malicious actors who want to get it and monetize it somehow potentially. So the next component is DevSecOps. IAM should try and follow the software development lifecycle as possible. So you want to apply version control as much as possible, ranging from your access control policies to tool customizations to configurations. So an example, I know that Ben has, he works in the, I'm not sure how we'd classify it. It's with business to business video platforms. He's also worked in the IAM space and has worked with access control specifically. So he'll be familiar with the idea of applying version control to access control policies and storing them in Git repositories. And this can be extended, beyond that. There are SailPoint implementations that you're supposed to be utilizing version control for them because you have custom rules and various configurations that you're doing, and you want to version control that as much as possible, and so you can have all the same benefits that coders get from applying version control to their software projects. And this can be extended to any IAM system. There are configurations that can be in a variety of different formats, like JSON, for instance, um, and you really want to version control it. You want to parameterize builds and other components with environment variables. If there are secrets, put those in a secrets manager. Um, you want to apply continuous integration with unit tests. So if going back to SailPoint, if you've made modifications and you want to test them, of course, you need to have unit tests for these. And the same thing applies to um, really everything in IAM, like access control. There are complicated access control policies in ABAC products, and you want to apply a unit test to that to make sure that it is as you expect it. Um, you want to do continuous deployment, ensure you're having consistent deployments in all your different environments. Apply containerization as appropriate to your IAM tooling, and as possible, use infrastructure as code for resources. Because once again, having that consistency is really useful and more secure when you want to have all the same environments and dev, QA, prod, UAT, etc. Um, yeah, any questions on DevSecOps? Yeah, I think this one's kind of straightforward. Um, the last component here is policies and procedures. So you should define formal documentation for your identity access management program, including components to identify the responsible, accountable, and consulted parties for various IAM tasks, standard operating procedures, system architecture diagrams, the current state of IAM in your organization, like the application landscape, and an ongoing knowledge base. All these things are really important to have, so everyone's on the same page. So people know what's going on, so you can improve upon your IAM program over time. These things are really important. You need to define methodology and processes for your access control, identity governance administration, PAM, and authentication programs. You should have policies and procedures that are defined, maintained, and planned to manage third-party organizations with whom data is shared. That could affect the security of your identity data. So it's important to have all the policies and procedures defined for how data is stored and used in your organization and with any other parties. So I see I'm getting a question in the chat. Can you talk about SOC 2 certification and how that plus others benefit the organization? Yeah, no, that's a good one. So with the SOC 2 certification, hmm, let's think the right way to phrase this one. So SOC 2, it's important, right? So information security, it's a concern for all organizations. Um, Including those that outsource, key business operations to like third party vendors. You think about like software as a service, cloud computing, etc. Um, and it's important that they're concerned. Mishandled data. We were just talking about third parties, which is probably what you made you think of this. Um, Mishandled data can leave enterprises vulnerable to attacks, like data theft and everything, like we're talking about, ransomware, malware getting installed. Cryptocurrency mining is a big one. And, SOC 2, it's an auditing procedure that ensures your service providers securely manage your data, protect the interests of your organization and the privacy of its clients. So it's a minimal requirement when considering a SaaS provider, in my opinion. So the SOC 2 certification looks at privacy, security, availability, integrity, confidentiality. Um, so it's not that rigid though. So PCI, for instance, PCI DSS, the payment card industry standard for credit card, merchants, anyone who processes a credit card is really rigid, and you have a lot of reporting. Um, SOC 2 is not rigid like PCI DSS, right? So the SOC 2 reports are really kind of unique, I think, to each organization. Um, so in line with specific business practices, each organization designs its own controls to apply with one of more of the trust principles. So certification is issued by these outside auditors. They assess the extent to which a vendor complies with one or more of the five principles that we just talked about: security, availability, integrity, confidentiality, and privacy. So they'll look at those and see, do you comply with these? Um, so I'd say it's important. I don't think, I mean, the SOC 2 compliance isn't going to guarantee that, your information is safe. I don't think it's rigid enough, and it's something that myself and a few of my colleagues, well, colleagues and former colleagues, are looking at is there a new standard that can be made and certify an organization that they really follow IAM rigidly and require even better reporting than you get today from SOC 2 and other certifications like it's like ISO standards and whatnot. Um, you'll see from what we're talking about today that we're going at it at a much more fine grained level. Um, so it's a great question. Yeah, I hope the next time we're speaking, I'm going over this new standard that I'm looking at creating with some people I know. Um, so touching on this last component here, policies and procedures. Um, policies and procedures, they should be defined, maintained, and you need to have key policy reports for your access control, IGA, PAM, and authentication programs. And you need to define at least 10 metrics for your access control, IGA, PAM, and authentication programs as well. You should document the location of all sensitive data and categorize it appropriately based on the impact of the organization. And this document with the location of all the sensitive data, of course, you want to make sure that's secure too. Um, you should define and document how your organization is implementing DevSecOps and IAM. Due to making IAM much more consistent, repeatable, maintainable, all the benefits we talked about. And you should document your access certification reports as they're performed on a regular basis, because a good auditor is going to want to see that you're granting access to the right people at the right time, with just the minimal amount of privileges they need to do their job. So, just to summarize, we've looked at 11 components here: centralized identity management, standards based authentication, federated identity, identity governance and administration, privileged access management, proper access control, threat modeling, integration with security operations, MFA, DevSecOps, and policies and procedures. Um, are there any final questions here from you all today? It's been we've had some great questions. Anything else? Excellent. Well, thank you all so much for attending today and learning about the critical components of an organization's identity access management program. It's been a pleasure, and I hope to see you all next time. Take care.